So, we'll start this session with meditation to review some of the things we were looking at yesterday. So start by making yourselves comfortable in a good position for meditation. And also let your mind settle down in the present. So if you notice in your mind any thoughts that are not of the present, thoughts of the future, where you're going to go after this course, what you're going to do, and so on, or any thoughts of the past. So put those thoughts aside. You can always bring them up again later and deal with them if you need to. But really try your best to stay in the present, right here, right now. And focusing on the breath is actually a good way to be in the present, because our breath is happening in the present. It's not in the past or the future, but it's right here, right now. So when we are paying attention to the breath coming in and going out, then our mind, our awareness is in the present moment. And this is a really good thing to do for ourselves, because normally our mind is very scattered, distracted, thinking about many different things, the past and the future and other places and people and problems and so on. And many of these thoughts are disturbing, not peaceful. So when our mind is caught up in disturbing thoughts and emotions, then that affects our body as well. Our body becomes more tense, stressed, and that can lead to illness. So it's good to at least sometimes spend time in the present, being aware of the breath coming in and going out, and giving our mind a break, a vacation from its usual busy activity. So spend a few minutes just staying with the breath, being aware of the breath coming in, going out, and bringing your awareness back to the breath when it wanders away. And then let's remember the positive motivation we generated yesterday. And a simple way of doing that is just having the wish that this meditation and whatever else we do today will be beneficial to ourselves, to others, and to the world. So now let's do a little bit of contemplation. So first, ask yourself if you think that you are your body. Do you identify with your body, feeling this is me? And one way we can check that is by looking at how we feel, how we respond when someone says something about our body, either something unpleasant, insulting, like, we're overweight, or we're too skinny, or we look like we're getting old. And if someone makes such a comment and we feel unhappy or maybe angry, then that shows we do identify with our body. But likewise, if someone makes a complimentary comment, if they say something pleasant, something we like to hear about our body, that we look really good, we're really attractive, we look like we've lost weight or whatever, and if we feel happy about that, then that's also a sign of identifying with our body. So according to Buddhism, and I think it's the same in other religions, other spiritual traditions, we are not our body. And there's one line in a Buddhist text that talks about the body being like a guest house, a hotel, for our mind to stay in for a while as it's traveling from one life to another. So the body is just like a temporary abode for our mind. Or in other religions, they use the term soul. They talk about a soul. But we don't really talk about that. We talk about the mind. And so we say the mind is something that lasts forever. It's eternal. And it just goes from one life to another, from one body to another. And so it just stays for a certain amount of time in the body. And therefore the body isn't who we really are. So given that our body is temporary and our mind is eternal, lasts forever, doesn't it make more sense to identify with our mind rather than with our body? But then when it comes to the mind, there are some aspects of the mind, some mental states that are afflictive, disturbing, negative, things like anger, hatred, greed, jealousy, and so on. And according to Buddhism, those are also not who we really are. They're not our true nature. They exist in our mind because of confusion or ignorance, not understanding the true nature of things, not seeing reality. And they are the cause of all our suffering, all the unwanted experiences we have, like sickness, aging, death, and all the different kinds of problems we have as we go through life, conflicts with other people, losing our job, having financial problems, and so on. So all those problems are caused by our afflictions, our delusions, and the karma we create under the influence of those delusions. And so if we want to be free of suffering, problems, all those unpleasant experiences, we need to free ourselves from those mental states, the afflictions. And that is possible. It is possible to eliminate them, make them non-existent in our mind. And that's the meaning of the third noble truth, the truth of cessation. We can cease or eliminate, become free of all those afflictive emotions and the karma that we create. And by freeing ourselves from those causes of suffering, we can be free of all suffering and problems and experience only peace and happiness. And that is our true nature, our true identity. a completely pure state of mind, free of afflictions, free of suffering, and always peaceful and blissful. So it may be hard to believe what I just said about the possibility of being free of suffering and the causes of suffering. But we probably all have certain moments. There's certain moments when we're not angry, we're not unhappy, and no afflictive emotions in our mind. And we may just feel really calm and peaceful, content. And have you ever had those experiences? They may only last a few moments, a few seconds, or maybe a few hours, and eventually they change. But the fact that we can have those experiences, even if they're just temporary, shows that the afflictive emotions and all the problems that come from them are not permanent things. They're not things that are everlasting. And, we're like stuck with them forever and ever and ever. But it is possible to be free of them. We just have to learn how to do it, how to work on our mind so that we can be in that peaceful state, free of suffering and its causes. So if we identify with our body and feel this is me, and if we have attachment to our body, clinging to it and having unrealistic ideas about it. So those kind of attitudes are obstacles to being able to attain the state of freedom and peace that is possible, this everlasting state of peace and happiness. So I like to think of an analogy to this. A bird has the ability to fly, has two wings, it can fly, it can soar in the sky. But if the bird is holding on to a branch or something else, right, it's clinging to that, it won't be able to fly. It can't fly and hold on to that branch at the same time, unless it's a tiny little branch and it can carry it in the sky. But if it's, a big, heavy branch, as long as it's clinging to that branch, then it's unable to fly. And so in a similar way, we have the potential, the ability to fly in the space of real peace and happiness, really blissful state of mind. But as long as we're clinging to things, as long as we have this attitude of clinging and attachment, craving, as the Buddha mentioned in the sutra, in his first teaching, as long as that is present in our mind, we're not free of that attitude, then we're preventing ourselves from being able to achieve that freedom. So, that might help us understand the problems of attachment and clinging. And one of the biggest objects of our attachment is the body, our own body, and also the bodies of others. Yeah. And so that is why there are those meditations that we did some meditations yesterday, but I also talked about other meditations that we didn't have time for. But the purpose of doing those meditations is to overcome this attitude of clinging, attachment to bodies. So by contemplating what the body is made of, what's the real nature of our body, you know, the substances our body is made of: skin, blood, bones, intestines, liver, muscles. Yeah. And then we can go even further to other parts, smaller parts like the cells and the molecules, the atoms. So if we really contemplate that kind of phenomena, yeah, what those are like, their nature and so on, then we get a very different idea about our body than what we normally have. Yeah, very different sense of our body. And that gradually, maybe not immediately, but gradually, then we just become less attached to our body, less identifying with our body. Yeah, we just see it doesn't make sense to identify with meat and blood and bones. You know, is that me? Is that who I am? And yeah, same with the four elements. That's maybe a little harder because that's not such a common idea in our Western culture. So, like I mentioned yesterday, you could think of chemicals if you're knowledgeable about different kinds of chemicals. You can think of the chemical composition of the body and contemplate those. And again, yeah, does it make sense to identify with those chemicals? Feel that's me, that's who I am. And then other meditations involve thinking about how our body will die and then turn into a corpse. And then a corpse is certainly not something to be attached to, right? When somebody dies and there's a corpse, we don't want it around, right? We want to dispose of it as soon as possible, either burying it or burning it. But you know, it's definitely not something that we want to keep around. So to think of our body becoming like that, becoming like a corpse, yeah. So does it make sense to have attachment to this body and identify ourselves with this body? So that's the purpose of those meditations. Yeah, it's not to develop aversion or disgust or hatred towards our body. Those are not healthy attitudes to have, but just to overcome attachment and develop, maybe we could say, dispassion, you know, a dispassionate attitude with regard to our body. Yeah. And yeah, having that kind of attitude is helpful for spiritual practice, and you know, being able to meditate and attain the different realizations of the path up to nirvana, enlightenment. And also attachment to our body and identifying with our body cause problems even here and now, even in this lifetime. Not just talking about how there are obstacles to spiritual growth, but even in a temporal sense, here and now, attachment to the body leads to problems like feeling unhappy when our body isn't the way we want it to be. You know, we have, I don't know, probably everybody has some dissatisfaction with their body. I remember once reading an article in a magazine about some of the most beautiful women, you know, beautiful actresses. like Sophia Loren and that are regarded as great beauties, incredibly beautiful, and how each of these women was dissatisfied with their body. Yeah, even though other people thought, wow, they are so beautiful, and probably many women wanted to look like them, but they themselves weren't happy about their bodies. They saw faults. Yeah, the nose is too big, or their thighs are too big, or this is too small. So they were dissatisfied with their body. Yeah. So that. I found that really interesting. And I think nowadays it's even more prevalent that people can be dissatisfied with their bodies. I don't do social media and Facebook and those kind of things, but what I've heard is, it's very disturbing that people can create an image of themselves. They can get photos they want, and they post those photos of themselves, and they also talk about all kinds of good things in their life. So they create this image of themselves as being very attractive and very successful and everything going well in their life, which is probably in many cases not true, right? It's exaggerated and unrealistic. But other people looking at those Facebook accounts then will feel unhappy and jealous and, like, what's wrong with me? I don't have a life like that. I don't have a body like that. And so it can produce a lot of unhappiness, a lot of dissatisfaction. And I've also heard of cases of suicide, people sometimes committing suicide, even young kids, teenagers committing suicide as a result of what's going on in social media. Sometimes maybe they're bullied. They get bullied by other kids making fun of them for the way they look, or, whatever faults or problems they may have. And sometimes these kids get so unhappy they kill themselves. Just incredibly sad, tragic. So does this kind of thing happen here in Spain? Are there cases of this? Yeah. Really sad. Yes.
Every now and then we have to hear news or read news about these kind of cases. Suicide.
Yeah. Yeah. But, one cause or one factor in this is this tendency to identify with the body, to feel this is me, this is who I am. And then if you're not happy with the body the way it is, if other people make fun of you or say things about you that make you feel even worse, then there's so much unhappiness, so many problems. Yeah. And then other problems that can occur due to identifying with the body is if our body gets sick, or some kind of disability happens. So the more strongly we identify with the body, then the more suffering we will have, mental suffering, on top of the physical suffering. So there's one sutra where the Buddha talked about arrows, and he said that if you have pain, like physical pain or sickness, or something happening to your body that's unpleasant, he said this is like being shot with an arrow. That's painful. There is pain there, definitely. But he says, by the way we respond, the way we react and respond to this problem, we sometimes shoot ourselves with another arrow. So if we get really unhappy about the sickness or the pain, what's happening with our body, if we mentally become unhappy about it, and then maybe we feel sorry for ourselves, and he said things like we moan and groan and cry and lament and make a big deal out of it, and then this is just making things worse. Yeah, instead of feeling better, we just make the situation worse. It's like we have two kinds of suffering. We have the physical suffering, what's happening with our body, and then we have the mental suffering, the way our mind is reacting. So it's like two arrows, having two arrows stuck in our body. Yeah. And you said another thing that people sometimes do when they have physical pain or suffering is they try to escape from it. They run away and they try to, involve themselves in something pleasurable. So we can see that today as well. A lot of people, as a result of some problem they have, they turn to drugs or alcohol or entertainment or sports or work. In English there's the term being a workaholic. Yeah, just keeping yourself really busy with work, and that way you don't have to think so much about your problems. But it's just an escape. It's an attempted escape. You can't really escape, but you're trying to escape. Yeah. So there's lots of ways people try to escape from their problems instead of dealing with them in a healthy way, in a realistic way. So in this way, we're actually increasing our suffering, making more problems for ourselves. Like the Buddha said, like shooting ourselves with another arrow instead of just dealing with the first one. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's something to look at. That's something to investigate in our experience. When we have pain or any problem with our body, how are we dealing with it mentally? Are we dealing with it in a healthy way? Or are we falling into these unhealthy responses, like trying to escape, or just being really, really unhappy, having a lot of unhappy thoughts in our mind, maybe becoming grumpy, bad-tempered, taking it out on the people around us, making them suffer as well. So just look at those kind of responses. And again, it's partly because of over-identification with the body, attachment to the body, having unrealistic expectations of the body, like, oh, my body should always feel good. I should never have any discomfort, any problems, any pain. Everything should go well with my body. So if we have attitudes like that, it's just not realistic, and we'll most probably be very unhappy when problems do happen with our body. But the Buddha, in Buddhism, we are advised to meditate on suffering, on the different kinds of problems that happen in life, and just be aware that as we go through life, these things are going to happen to us, so that we expect them. We just know this is going to happen. So if we contemplate those and get familiar with those, then when we get sick, we have pain, we have the aging, all the different aspects of aging, we won't be so upset about it, but we'll just know, well, this is part of life. This is what happens as you go through life. So then we can manage those problems better instead of being overly upset by them. So the point is, yeah, if we have unhealthy ideas and attitudes about our body, then that can lead to more problems, more suffering for us. And then there's death. A lot of people, probably most people in the world are afraid of death, dying. And according to Buddhism, death is the point at which our mind and our body separate. Like they have a divorce. During our life, our mind and our body, abide together in a sort of interdependent way, interconnected way. But at some point, the mind will separate from the body. The mind will leave the body, and then the body becomes a corpse. Lifeless, no awareness, no activity happening, and the mind leaves and will take another life, another rebirth. But a lot of people in the world don't believe such a thing, that there is something like a mind or a soul that continues to exist after death. They think there's only this body, nothing more than this physical body. And then when death happens, that's kind of the end of everything. Everything finishes with death. And so people who have that kind of view might feel fear. Like death means I am going out of existence. I am being annihilated. And that's not a pleasant thought to have. And so a lot of people are afraid of death. But people who have worked on their attitudes about the body and have kind of more realistic, more healthy ideas about the body, like seeing it as just a temporary abode for the mind, then they probably aren't so afraid of death, because they see it as, the time when the mind or the soul leaves this body and then goes somewhere else. So that gives some comfort, especially if they lived a good life. They lived a life where they, helped others and lived ethically and avoided unethical, harmful behavior. So if they lived a good life, a virtuous life, then they probably feel confident about where they will go, what will happen to them after death, rather than being afraid. And this isn't something that only happens in Buddhism, but it happens in all religions, all spiritual traditions. Yeah. So, for example, I was with my mother when she passed away. She was, I think, 87, and she died of cancer. And so I was with her for the last 2 weeks of her life. And I was kind of amazed at how calm she was, how accepting she was of death. I didn't expect that. Somehow I thought she'd be afraid. But she didn't show any sign of fear. I mean, she knew she was going. She knew she was going to die, and she accepted it. She accepted that it was time for her to go. And she didn't show any attachment to her kids, her 5 children, although we were grown up, but, she didn't show any attachment and, not wanting to leave us. And she didn't show any attachment to her house, her belongings. No attachment at all. And like she was just ready to go. She just accepted it was her time to go. And I think that the reason she was so calm and accepting of death was because of her religious faith. Because somebody actually asked her at some point, "Aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid of death?" And she said, no. And she said, God has taken good care of me all my life, and I know he's going to take care of me now. So I was like, wow. I never realized she wasn't overtly religious, you know. She wasn't like somebody who was always praying. But you know, it must have been something she just kept in her heart, this faith in God, this feeling of closeness to God. And so that belief that, you know, God is there and he's taking care of me, everything will be okay, that gave her confidence and a sense of, non-fear in the face of death. She just felt it's going to be okay. God's going to take care of me. Yeah? So I was just amazed at that, and it was really beautiful to see. And she was all the way up to the end, the last, you know, few minutes of her life. She was in a really good state of mind and not even concerned about herself, but concerned about others, concerned about me and the other family members who were around. So, so she had a good death, a beautiful death. And I've heard other stories as well, similar stories of people who are very calm and peaceful, accepting of death, ready to let go and leave things behind and move on to the next life. So, yeah, so these are some of the benefits of working on our attitudes about our body and learning to not be so attached to our body and not cling to our body, not identify with our body. When these kind of changes happen, body gets older and sick and then it eventually dies, we'll be able to stay calm and accepting and not have so much fear or unhappiness about these experiences. Okay, so any last questions about this first of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, about the body, before I move on to the second one about feelings?
Well, not exactly, but the last things you were saying, let's say that we are, you know, we have a difficulty in life, any difficulty, maybe actual physical thing.
If we have a difficult
situation
yeah.
in life,
Mm-hmm.
Illness or pain or any other situation, what would be the tool to meditate on? I mean, when we are feeling the actual suffering.
Yeah. Well, there are actually many different tools, and there's one kind of body of teachings and practices in our tradition that's called Lojong, or mind training or mind transformation. And so within that, there are these methods that you can use to transform problems and difficulties. And in fact, there's one book, it might be in the bookshop here, it's called Transforming Suffering into Happiness by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Yeah. So in that book, there are some of these methods or tools, and one of the methods I like most is compassion, using problems to increase your compassion. So basically, you know, when we have a problem, whatever it is, physical or emotional, we're, you know, just to remind ourselves that we're not the only person in the world who has problems. Because what can happen, like probably many people have this experience, you know, they tend to just focus on me and my problem, you know, and just get really absorbed, obsessed with my problem. And it can seem as if I am the only one in the world who has a problem like this. Everybody else is happy, doing well. Nobody else has this kind of problem. So it's crazy to think that way, but this is what our mind can say, yeah? It's this tendency to be obsessed with oneself and one's own problems. And the effect of that is your problem seems bigger and worse. We have this expression in English, making a mountain out of a molehill. You must have something similar in Spanish. Yeah. The idea is there's actually something relatively small, but because you're so kind of obsessed with it, thinking about it, worrying about it, it can seem to grow and become huge, bigger than it really is. So this is what can happen, you know, with our normal state of mind. But if we remind ourselves that other people have problems too, not only me, but others, turn our attention out there, then it's obvious that we're not the only person who has problems. And also, if we compare our problem with other people's problems, we can see that my problem is actually quite small. Yeah, if you think about the people in Gaza, the people in Ukraine, the people in Sudan, you know, so many places in the world where people are experiencing incredible suffering, you know, starving, being bombed, being homeless. So thinking about the problems of others, then your own problem will seem kind of, it shrinks. It seems smaller. And the effect of that is that it seems manageable. Instead of being huge and overwhelming, it can seem small and manageable. I can manage this. I can handle this. It's not that bad. It's not that big. So that itself is very, very helpful. Yeah, to get a sense of I can take care of this. And also by thinking about this, the suffering of others, the problems of others, that opens our heart to feel compassion. Yeah, then we can think, oh my goodness, those people, what they're going through is unbelievable. Oh, how sad that is. I wish I could help them. I wish they could be free of their suffering. So that's the feeling of compassion, which is a really important part of Buddhist practice. And I mean, all religions and spiritual traditions talk about the importance of compassion. So we have compassion, but it can be grown, it can be developed further. And this is one way of doing that, using a problem that we have to understand the suffering, the problems of others, and in that way open up our heart more, increase our compassion for others. So that's one of these methods. And I think you don't have to be Buddhist to use this. I mean, some of the other methods involve Buddhist ideas like karma, thinking in terms of karma. So if you're not so sure about karma, that wouldn't work. But I think everyone can understand compassion and the importance of having compassion. And compassion is a really beautiful state of mind, a really virtuous, positive state of mind. So when we can use a problem to generate compassion, that itself is kind of healing, right? We're getting ourselves into a state of mind that's healthy, healing, and brings some amount of happiness. So even if your own problem is still there, it hasn't changed, it hasn't gone away, but your mind is in a different state. So you're not so bothered by your problem. So just for an example of that, the Dalai Lama talks about one experience he had once while in India. He had, I think it was gallstones, gallstones. And it was incredibly painful, and he had to be taken to a hospital. But he was in a sort of remote part of India, and the hospital was quite far away, so he had to sit in a car for a couple of hours to get to a hospital. And he said it was really, really painful. But as they were driving through little villages in India, he was looking out the window and seeing all these people, like, really poor people, little kids who were dressed in rags and really skinny, and elderly people who were kind of abandoned, just lying there on the ground. And so he saw lots of signs of suffering and was feeling this, a lot of compassion for all these people. And he said he kind of didn't notice his own pain so much. So focusing on the suffering of others and feeling compassion for them made him sort of forget about or not be so concerned about his own suffering. So that's one very helpful method for dealing with problems. So yeah, whatever kind of problem it is, whether it's pain or sickness or financial problems or whatever, we can always think about other people who have similar problems and even worse problems than what we're going through. And then impermanence is also helpful, just to contemplate that the problem isn't going to last forever. It's there it's now, and it may last for a while, but it won't be there forever. So that can help us also to have more confidence, more strength, more courage to manage it. Another thing too is that problems can sometimes be beneficial. In fact, always. They can always be beneficial. We can learn from them. Yeah, they're like opportunities for growth of good qualities and learning and so on. So, for example, one monk I know, he's an American monk, and I actually met him before he became a monk, and he told me that he had cancer in his early 20s. He had an experience of cancer, and he said this was the best thing that happened to him in his life. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Why? And he said two good things came of that. One was, while he was going through the medical treatment for his cancer, he stayed with his family, and he hadn't been on good terms with his family. There were conflicts and problems that hadn't been resolved. But during that time, when he was staying with his family and, getting treatment for cancer, they were able to resolve their problems and become free of them. So he became much closer to his family. And that's very good. It's not comfortable to have unresolved problems with family members. So that was one good thing that came out of that experience with cancer. And the other good thing was that he became interested in meditation and spiritual practice. So it was like, it's like a confrontation with death when you have cancer. So I guess it made him think about things he hadn't thought about before, and he got interested in pursuing spiritual practice. So he started learning Buddhism, started practicing meditation, and then eventually he became a monk and did really well in his practice and studies. So he's now a really happy person and a teacher, teaching others. So that's just one example of how a situation that might appear terrible, right? Getting cancer is certainly not something people would want to happen to them, but it's possible to learn something and grow from such an experience. So that's the basic idea, is that, yeah, problems aren't necessarily bad. It all depends on our mind and what we do, how we think, how we manage that situation. Again, that's why mind is so important. Yeah, makes all the difference. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question about, today introduced the term faith.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I have problems how to deal with that. Because yesterday also we talked about what Buddha said, to believe something without experience by yourself. And sometimes I have problems how to deal with death or karma, because I feel like the only way is by faith. I don't know how to that.
Yeah, that's a good point, and a very common question. So I'm someone who's skeptical by nature. So when I started learning Buddhism, I was very happy with many of the teachings, many of the ideas, but I had difficulty with some of them. Some of them were really hard for me, and I really struggled to believe and accept them. So one thing that can help is to look at the aspects of Buddhism that you can experience as valid, as true. For example, how negative emotions like anger and attachment, how these lead to suffering and problems. So this is something we can check in our own experience, right? We can see for ourselves. Already in the past, we had lots of experiences of that, and we can also see it in the present. So that's one teaching that the Buddha gave, that we can easily understand and accept and have faith in the sense of accepting that it's true. And the opposite of how positive states of mind, like kindness and compassion and helping others, not harming others, how this leads to happiness. This is the cause of happiness. So that's also something we can check for ourselves in our experience and see that it's true. It may take some time to do that, but we can most probably see, yeah, I feel much better when I'm kind to others and help others instead of being mean and nasty to them. I feel happier. So we can get some first-hand experience of some of the Buddha's teachings. And also maybe the practice of meditation. Yeah, if we try doing meditation and we find that that helps, yeah, that's good for us. And that's also something we can verify, we can get experience of. And so if we can experience some of the Buddhist teachings as true and valid, then that helps our mind be more open to other things the Buddha taught that we can't really check for ourselves, that we can't verify for ourselves. But we can think, well, Buddha was right about this. Maybe he's right about that too, you know. And so we can sort of take that on, well, maybe it's true, yeah? Like past lives, for example, or karma, yeah? Those things that we can't really check for ourselves. But, you know, if we can have some trust in the Buddha, some confidence in the Buddha, then we might be more open to considering things that he taught that we can't check for ourselves. So that's one approach that we can, and I think the Buddha would agree with that as well, because some things we can't, at this point in time, we can't be sure of, like past lives, future lives. If we can't remember our own past lives, we can't see our future lives, we can't verify that for ourselves. So we need to do more exploration, more investigation. It is said that through the practice of meditation, if you develop concentration in particular, really, really good concentration, on the basis of that, it's possible to remember past lives. So in time, if we keep practicing and working on our mind and developing our abilities, our mental abilities, then we can get to the point where we can have our own first-hand experience of that aspect of the Buddha's teachings, past lives. So it's like right now I can't prove I can't prove if it's true or not, but maybe one day I will be able to do that. And likewise with other things that the Buddha taught, like attaining nirvana, becoming free of suffering. Right now we can't be 100% sure of that, but if we keep practicing, keep going, we will be able to have that experience. And so those are some ideas about how to deal with that question. Because Buddhism says there's actually different kinds of faith. So one kind of faith is sometimes it's called the faith of belief, but I don't know if that's such a good term. It's faith that comes from having investigated, having analyzed, and come to certainty about something, where you're so certain that nobody can convince you otherwise, because it's based on your own experience, your own first-hand experience. But they say that is the best kind of faith to have, although it takes time to get to that point. But another kind of faith is faith that admires the good qualities of someone like the Buddha. So if you learn about the Buddha, you read about his life, you read about his teachings, and you have a sense that I really like the Buddha, what he did and his qualities and his teachings and so on. So you feel a sense of admiration. You're inspired by the Buddha. So that's another kind of faith, where you're willing to learn more about what he taught, because he's a good person and did good things and taught some really valuable things. So that's another kind of faith. And then another kind of faith is where you want to emulate those qualities yourself. I want to be like that. I want to have those same qualities in myself. So those are the three types of faith that are explained in the Buddha's teachings. So, yeah, you might look at that and recognize that, yeah, you do have some of those. Yeah, even if you can't have all of them, you might have some. And then the more we study and practice and develop our mind, then we can gain other kinds of faith, more firm, strong kinds of faith. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, so it isn't that, when we start learning Buddhism, it isn't that we have to believe it all, we have to accept it all. It's more like, well, you investigate, you check for yourself and see what you're able to accept, what you're able to use in your life, and take that. And with the other things that you can't prove or you can't be sure of, you can just put them to the side for now. And maybe later those things will make sense and you will want to make them part of your life. I've heard some of my teachers say that, when it comes to learning Buddhism and practicing Buddhism, we can be like a shopper in a supermarket. There's many, many things to buy, but you don't have to buy all of them. You go in and you just buy a few items and you leave the rest there for other people. So, they say it's similar with Buddhism. You don't have to believe everything. You don't have to do everything from the beginning. You can just choose a few things, a few of the items that you are attracted to and you feel this will be helpful for me. And then, leave the rest there for other people. And maybe later you'll go back and take some more things, buy some more things. So I like that analogy. I think that's really helpful. So let's just start looking at the next. If you can put the slides up.
She's started to practice meditation, and like about a year ago, during the first sessions, what happened when she got the correct posture, without any apparent reason or any thought, she just burst into laughing, ha ha ha, something like this, without knowing where is it coming from. And what is happening now, like in these sessions during the course, is kind of the same, but he feels a very strong need for crying, burst into tears, without any previous thought or without any. She's like, I don't want to abandon the meditation because I feel like firm in this, but suddenly out of nowhere, wow, it's like my body is bombing, it's like
a bomb.
Explosion. So where am I wrong?
No, it's not that you're doing something wrong. But I think in all traditions, teachers of meditation say that when we do meditation, we can sometimes have unusual experiences that don't seem to have any explanation. So it's quite normal, it's quite typical. It doesn't happen to everybody, but some people do have strange experiences when they meditate. And one teacher said that it could be because we're doing something unusual. Most of the time our body is busy doing something, our mind is busy doing something. And so it's actually quite unusual to sit still, to just try to keep our body still in one place, and also keep our mind still on whatever we're trying to meditate on, like the breath. This is something unusual for our body and mind, something out of the ordinary. And because of that, it can sometimes lead to unusual experiences. And I sometimes hear stories, people tell me stories about things that happen to them in meditation that I haven't had those experiences. Sometimes people feel like their body is floating off the floor, or they feel like their body is moving, but when they open their eyes, they see that it's not moving. And or they have strange images coming into their mind, or they have strange feelings, emotions coming up. So I hear lots of stories like that. And so what the meditation teachers say is, don't be upset about this and don't be excited about it. Try to just deal with it in the same way that you deal with thoughts, memories, distractions. It's just something happening, and if we can just notice it and then come back to the object of meditation, the breath, and just kind of ignore that experience, then eventually it will stop, it will go away. And so try to deal with it in the same way you deal with any other distraction, and not worry, and not feel you're doing something wrong. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It's just something going on in your body and mind, and I am not in a position to explain why this is happening. You yourself might find the answer to that, right? If you keep practicing, keep meditating, maybe one day you will understand why that is happening. Or it might just stop happening and never happen again. And you don't need to understand why it's happening. Yeah, but our body and our mind have many different levels. You know, the gross one, and then there's subtler one, and subtler ones. So there's actually a lot going on in our body and mind that we're normally not aware of. And sometimes meditation can make us more aware of the subtler levels of our body and mind. And on those levels, there may be things going on that, we're normally not aware of. And then we become aware of them when we're meditating. So try to not take it too seriously or worry about it. Try to just ignore it, let it pass. And if that doesn't work, if it doesn't pass, then see if you can find a more experienced teacher that you can talk to and get advice for. And sometimes too, therapists can help. Like, you know, some of the things that come up in our mind when we're meditating might be related to maybe traumatic experiences that we had in our life, in the earlier part of our life, that were sort of buried and we're not normally aware of them. But then when we practice meditation, those things can come up into our awareness, and they might be related to, painful emotions that we might not be able to manage on our own, and it could be helpful to talk to a therapist, get help with those. A therapist or a meditation teacher, someone else. So but don't think you're doing something wrong. Okay. Next slide. That one. Okay, so this is the second of the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And it's about feelings. And so feeling in Buddhism is said to be an ever-present mental factor. I already talked about this a little bit yesterday. And so every moment with every mental experience we have, there's always a feeling accompanying that. And there's just 3 types of feelings. Pleasant, like the little girl at the top, she's obviously having happiness, experiencing a happy feeling. And then unpleasant feeling, like the little boy in the middle, is clearly unhappy about something. And then neutral feeling. I thought that picture, that man, kind of not really happy, not really unhappy, just sort of in between. So in English, I don't know about Spanish, but in English people sometimes use the word feeling and emotion interchangeably as if they are the same thing, but in Buddhism they're not. So feeling is a much more basic experience, like the first time we see something or have any perception or any thought. In that first moment, there's a feeling, a pleasant or an unpleasant or a neutral feeling. And then later, that can lead to an emotion like attachment or anger, aversion, or jealousy. So that on the level of emotions, there's a lot more variety, many different kinds of emotions, disturbing emotions. But feeling is like the first experience we have. And I have some doubt about this word sensation. I don't know what connotation it has in Spanish. In English, some translators use the term sensation. Understanding of sensation, that word, it has more to do with physical sensations, like feeling hot or feeling cold or tingling in the body. So it has more to do with bodily experiences. Does that have that, the word sensation in Spanish? Does it have that kind of connotation? A physical sensation? Whereas in Buddhism, this particular mental factor doesn't only accompany the body, but can accompany any of our sensory experiences. For example, hearing a sound, seeing an object, smelling an odor, tasting some taste, and also on the mental level. We have a thought, a memory, any kind of mental experience. There's always a feeling accompanying that. So it isn't just about the body, about physical sensations. So I don't know, you can use whatever word you want in Spanish, but the important thing is to understand the meaning, what it's talking about, what it's referring to. So, like for example, when I mentioned yesterday, we look at something beautiful like the flowers, and if we do find them beautiful, so then that visual experience of seeing the flowers together with that is a pleasant feeling, and it's not really about the body; it's more about the mind. Accompanying that visual experience. Although, having said that, when we have pleasant feelings, whether it's with seeing something or hearing something or thinking something, a pleasant feeling, I think it does affect the body. We probably feel in our body, we probably feel more comfortable, relaxed, happy. So our body will be affected, but it starts in the mind. Those pleasant experiences we have in our body come from our mind. They're related to our mind. They don't start in the body, but they start in the mind. So that would be the Buddhist understanding, the Buddhist explanation. Which is interesting because I've read that in psychology, there are some people, some psychologists, who believe the other way around, who think that we first have bodily experiences and then have a mental experience. So for example, if there's some danger, some scary thing, dangerous thing happening outside of us, and our body, will feel startled and tight and tense. So they say we first experience fear in our body, then our mind, noticing what's happening in our body, will experience fear. So that's a view that some psychologists have. It starts in our body. Our body first reacts, and then our mind reacts. So that's totally opposite to the Buddhist view. In Buddhism, no, it's the other way around. We first have a mental experience and then our body. Or maybe they're simultaneous, I don't know, or very, very fast. But they say that it's our mind first. But sometimes things that happen in our mind can be kind of subtle and not easy to recognize. So we may not recognize what's happening in the mind until we notice our body is feeling tense. And then, oh, what's happening here? And then we might notice something in our mind. But according to Buddhism, it always starts in our mind. Emotions, feelings always start in the mind. But then the mind and the body are interconnected and interrelated. And so, like these photos, you can see how the feeling in the mind affects the body. It affects facial expression and also body language, right? You can kind of tell by looking at somebody's face and also by their body, how they're holding their body. You can kind of tell if they're unhappy or they're happy, right? Okay, so we've come to the end of our time for this session. We'll have a break now until 11:30, and then come back and talk more about feelings and why feelings are considered important in Buddhism and why we practice mindfulness of feelings and how to practice that. So we just have one more session before lunch, so we won't be able to get too far into this. But this is a really important topic in Buddhism, feelings and what happens with feelings.